This is one that has everybody that sees the word shaking in their boots. Retrogression. If retrogression will happen by November, what does this mean?
Right. So, yeah, the State Department, they actually had a video that you can watch. It was released maybe Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah.
If you Google YouTube, Charlie Oppenheim, not Charlie Oppenheimer, the State Department, they do a monthly video. I watched it earlier this week. The information that we're getting from Charlie seems a little bit inconsistent, which is a shame because traditionally he's done a good job. And Charlie has been running the State Department's visa bulletin for, gosh, at least 15 or so years, maybe even longer than that. And so he does understand this stuff quite well. But what he has explained is that there's essentially two ways that one can get a green card, or at least an employment-based green card. One is to do it domestically here in the United States, and that's if you're in the United States, maybe on a student visa or an H-1 visa or some other visa. That's called adjustment of status. And there's a second way, which is the way most of the nurses come in. Indeed, almost all the Filipino nurses come into the U.S., and that's through the consular processing. And so the issue here is that the green cards that are being processed here in the United States, there has been no fall off. They are still being processed at the same rate. In fact, actually the fastest rate in about 15 years I've seen. So the visas are being used here domestically, but as we all know, overseas with the shortages at the embassy, they're very, very light at the embassy. And so if the State Department puts in retrogression in November, which is what the visa bulletin that came out implied, the goal there is actually to make sure that all the visas are not used domestically here. And so actually, believe it or not, and it's counterintuitive, but a retrogression for Philippine EB3 is actually to the benefit of many people on this call. And the reason is because we will be essentially new green cards that are filed here in the United States will not be able to get their visas, therefore keeping visas on reserve for Philippines with priority dates of 2018, 2019, 2020. So that's the goal. It's to essentially make sure that there are plenty of visas on reserve for the consular processes. That's one explanation that Charlie's giving. A second explanation that Charlie's giving is that the demand for visas has been higher than he expected. And so therefore, more visas are being claimed than he expected. I certainly accept that as an answer from Charlie. I think he's being truthful. It is a little disconcerting that 30 days ago, he had no idea this was happening. And now 30 days later, it's been this dramatic. And he's pointing to filings that happened last October. So the information we're getting out of him, I don't want to say it's inconsistent, but it is concerning that the information changes so dramatically. He also, at least once or twice in that video, implied that while he expects there to be a retrogression in November, he didn't really say how long it would be for either the worldwide EB3 or the Philippine EB3. He half implied that it might only be until something like January. So those are some negative factors because of the lack of information. On the positive side, he seemed to imply that he expected that the embassies would be coming online and processing a lot faster in the forthcoming months, which is ultimately the best news for everybody who's on this video, Tanya.
Okay. So Chris, that's a lot of information and a lot of different
complicated issue, yeah.
Yes. What for any nurse who's in the Philippines right now or in the UAE right now, what is their takeaway from this change on the visa bulletin and the possible retrogression? Yeah,
that's a good question, a good way to think about it, Tanya. I think the first thing is there's nothing anyone can do about it. So worrying, getting nervous, even complaining over it doesn't do any good. It's ephemeral and it doesn't really help. So that's the first thing. Getting educated, maybe watching the video that I'm suggesting. If you're really that curious, it's only about 40 minutes long. And so you'll have the latest information from this week. I think that's a productive use of people's times, Tanya. I think those are the most important things. I also think the reality is there are a lot of visas in there that are available, and there continue to be a lot of visas available. And it's changing quite quickly, as we can tell. I mean, just 30 days ago, there was no hint that this retrogression was coming. And now all of a sudden, oh my goodness, retrogression is coming. So I think it could change again. But really what we need to hope for is that the Manila embassy gets open and starts processing cases, because that ultimately is the answer. It doesn't really do any good if the visa bulletin is current or if the visa bulletin gets backlogged 20 years. If the embassy can't process visas, then we're all stuck.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So I think the big message is for everybody not to panic, because it is, as Chris said, out of our control. And I think probably it's also a little bit of, I mean, even for me, Chris, like that post-traumatic stress of what happened in 2019 or even in, I think it was late 2008 and late 2019 with the retrogression. And people just hear that word and it just gets very scary. So there's a question here that comes from Ida. Can my case be still filed for a new petition if there's a retrogression?
Yeah, I mean, she should check with the first thing I always counsel on this, Tanya, is why are you leaving your first employer? You will want to, most importantly, make sure that you're not violating a contract, which can be very costly and very problematic. Assuming that's not a problem, then yes, you can recapture a priority date. So if you have company A with a, 2019 priority date, and company A tells you we no longer need you or want you to come to the US, if you file for company B and it's done the correct way, even though you file for company B in September of 2021, your I-140 approval notice will be backdated back to 2019, which will at least put you in the retrogression queue from 2019 and not 2021.
Okay, but I think the bottom line, Chris, is that I've got a lot of questions from nurses as well, just saying, I've just passed my NCLEX. Can my case be filed even if there's a retrogression?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so that's good for everybody to know.